Let's talk about Chicago. You know, it's one of America's great cities. We all know the skyline, the culture, the energy, but right now, underneath all of that, there's a financial storm brewing, and it involves a truly mind-boggling amount of money.
Okay, just look at this number, $41.1 billion. According to a recent report from the watchdog group Truth in Accounting, that's the gap between what Chicago actually has and what it's promised to pay out. It's a financial hole so deep it's almost hard to wrap your head around.
So you have to ask, how in the world does this happen, right? How does a major American city end up in a financial spot that's this bad? That's exactly what we're going to break down right now.
To really get what's going on, we can start with something that's basically the city's financial report card. And trust me, it gives us a crystal clear picture of just how serious this problem is.
The facts here are pretty brutal. Truth in Accounting gave the city a big fat F for its finances. That $41.1 billion gap, it translates to something called a taxpayer burden of $42,600. Think about that for a second. To actually fill this hole, every single taxpayer in Chicago would need to just write a check for that amount. And when you look at the 5 biggest cities in the U.S., only New York is in worse shape. So where's all this red ink coming from? I mean, it's not from fixing roads or building parks. Nope. The vast majority of this financial hole comes from one single place. A massive and, frankly, growing public pension crisis. All right, the key phrase you need to know here is unfunded pension liability. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually super simple. It's the huge gap between the retirement benefits the city has promised to its public employees, we're talking police, firefighters, teachers, and the money the city has actually saved up to pay for it all. And this visual, this really tells the whole story. For every single dollar that Chicago has promised in future pension benefits, it only has about 25 cents in the bank. That leaves a 75% funding gap. That is where this multi-billion-dollar disaster comes from. Now, here's where things get kind of confusing. In spite of this enormous shortfall, city officials always say that Chicago operates with a balanced budget. So, how can both of those things be true? Well, the answer comes down to some, let's say, creative accounting. Sheila Weinberg, the CEO of Truth in Accounting, puts it perfectly. She says that in government budgeting, you can do things that would be insane in the real world. For example, the city's budget can count borrowed money as revenue. It also tends to only count the bills it's paid today, not all the massive bills it knows are coming due in the future, like all those pension promises. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. Chicago is paying what the law requires it to. That's called the statutory contribution. But that amount is way less than what financial experts, the actuaries, say is actually needed to keep the pensions funded for the long haul. It's literally like having a massive credit card bill and only making the tiny minimum payment each month. Yeah, you're following the rules, but your debt is just getting bigger and bigger every day. But is this just how it has to be for every big city? Is everyone in this much trouble? Not even close. And to see that, we just have to look at how another huge city is handling the exact same problems. Just look at this contrast with Los Angeles. It is night and day. Chicago gets that F grade with a crazy $42,600 taxpayer burden. Meanwhile, LA gets a C with a burden of just $1,300. And the biggest difference is sitting right there at the bottom. Los Angeles funds its pensions based on what the experts recommend, not just what the legal bare minimum is. The whole approach in Los Angeles is just fundamentally different. They pay what their own experts tell them they should. They even go a step further and fund retiree healthcare benefits too. And what's the result? They aren't just kicking the can down the road and making tomorrow's taxpayers pay for today's services. So this tale of two cities really brings up a much bigger conversation, because these huge shortfalls in places like Chicago aren't just a local issue. They have the potential to become a national problem, and that's leading some people to call for a federal solution.
And here's why this should matter to you, no matter where you live. The big worry is that if things don't change, there's a real risk that taxpayers all across the country could eventually be asked to bail out these deeply indebted city and state governments.
You know, there's actually a precedent for this. Way back in the 1970s, a bunch of private companies went bankrupt and their workers lost their pensions. So Congress stepped in and passed a law called ERISA to protect private sector retirement plans. But state and local government pensions were totally left out of that. So the proposal on the table now is to create a similar federal law that would force public pensions to be fully funded, just like private ones have to be.
So when you strip everything else away, what this all comes down to is a really fundamental conflict. And it leaves us with this critical question that cities all over the country are wrestling with. How do you balance the promises you've made to your dedicated public workers with the promises you've made to the taxpayers who have to foot the bill? It's a multi-billion-dollar question, and there are no easy answers.